Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Cape Lead Revolution. This is Chachi with a phenomenal guest. This is a gentleman that I met about a month ago speaking at Air Command and Staff College at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, Jim Vaselopulos. Jim has his own podcast, and obviously we're going to talk about that. But Jim has been a consultant to many companies in nearly every industry. He's an entrepreneur, started many companies, managed partnerships, and participated in several well-orchestrated exits. As the founder of Rafty Advisors, he helps early-stage companies get off on the right foot, and helps growth-stage companies push through plateaus and more mature companies with strategic shifts and complex challenges. Most importantly to me, Jim is the co-host of one of my favorite repositories of information for all things related to leadership, the Leadership Podcast. Jim, welcome to the Cape Lead Revolution.
Hey, thank you, Chachi. I appreciate it. It's lots of fun, and I'm glad our paths crossed in Alabama because we had a nice conversation there with Abigail, and so I'm glad Abigail grabbed me and introduced us. That was kind of nice.
Absolutely. So Abigail, huge thanks to you for that. But Colin, following a little bit of your playbook, why don't you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about you that we can't find in your bio or online?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a total family man. Family's everything to me. I've got my beautiful wife, 2 kids, one in college, one about to go into college. Big extended Greek family. I mean, so like we, the whole my big fat Greek wedding thing. It's like it's like you're kind of living it with us. And so that's just family's the most important thing to me, and all the other stuff is just gravy. So that's a little bit about who I am. It's big Greek family. That's it.
Nice. And again, so I don't think there's any better title that a person can have than family man, for the people that they care about most. And so speaking of that, as you and I are doing this podcast from the comfort of our homes in Phoenix, Arizona, and Chicago, Illinois, obviously you and I would like to send our express warm wishes to everybody out there. Hope that you are faring well during this COVID-19 pandemic. So we wish you health and happiness, and hopefully a speedy recovery for those who are dealing with this. Also, since he and I are at home, life is going to happen. So whether kids shoot in or pets or you hear garbage trucks go by, please excuse the unprofessional nature of this, but I absolutely love the authenticity of that as well. So please bear with us as we go through that. And then also, as everyone's trying to do some of these digital meetings, we may have a little hitch in our giddy up when it comes to the digital connectivity. So I apologize for any glitch in the matrix for that happen. So please bear with us as life.
Matrix. You're already starting with the movie quotes. I love it.
And so we'll definitely talk about that. But before we get into the movie quotes, and I absolutely love that you are a movie quote person. And I'm trying to slow down talking, but I'm just so excited. Like this is amazing. So let's kind of start with the softball question. Is like when did you become aware that the study of leadership would either become your life's work or at least a distinct part of your life's work?
It's the exact moment, is hard to kind of pin down. I mean, I knew from an early age leadership was kind of important. We watched World War II movies growing up, and they always, John Wayne is at the forefront of some charge or something like that. And so the group of, young kids we hung out with in the neighborhood, we're always like competing for who was going to be the leader and things like that. But it really wasn't until I was kind of, because we're talking about like the study of leadership. I was in one of my businesses and I was having a struggle with one of my partners, and, great guy, super smart. And we just weren't seeing eye to eye. And I couldn't understand why we weren't seeing eye to eye. And what happened is it took me a while, and it was like a painful time because we were really clashing. I mean, it was like a lot of clash. And I didn't separate necessarily management and leadership, and he was a great manager, but leadership wasn't really his thing. And so he was always like trying to do the ticky tack and the metrics and all this other stuff. And I'm like, we can give people all the metrics in the world, but they're not going to want to do that. It's just like we got to understand the motivations behind it. And it wasn't until that I just had this epiphany. I'm like, he's talking management, I'm talking leadership. Neither of us is more right than the other because it's a combination of both. And that's when I really started understanding, let's say, where's the difference and where do we kind of separate these two and why one is important at certain times and the other might be important at other times. And that was when I started becoming more of a student of leadership, instead of just like, oh, leadership is important and I can persuade people to do things and things like that. That's when I guess the study kicked in, and that was probably halfway through my professional career. I mean, it wasn't early on.
Wow. And so through those times from that part of we call it the enlightenment period
Yeah,
of
it's a good word.
to now, do you have any kind of like benchmark moments along the way that have really kind of catapulted you through your growth and evolution as a leader and as a bringer of leadership content to the world?
Yeah, I always think I got really lucky, getting out of school, and it was kind of not the best time. Uh, and I got a really sweet job, and there's like a super long story about how I got it. I never probably should have gotten the job. And it was in this rotational training program through this large manufacturer, in Milwaukee, Allen Bradley at the time. I think they're Rockwell Automation now. And the you had all these jobs. So you went in, you did maybe an engineering job, then you did a factory job and, a leadership job. And, one of my rotations, I had to like manage people, and I was like, what, 23, 24 at the time. I had to manage like a group of like 100 people who were my parents' age working in a factory. And, you get thrust into that, and all of a sudden you're just like, you know, I have to tell people what to do. I have to, I had to sit at the little punch card, thing where people come in and punch their time in the morning and tell people they were late. And, some days I was doing that. I mean, I was 23, 24 years old. Someday I'm sure they could probably still smell the beer from the night before on my breath. And so, it was one of these things where you kind of have to learn leadership. But I'll tell you, that was like the best because people took me under their wing and taught me a lot of things, like the union steward, a couple of the people who were like my assistants and kind of running the department, that were all union workers, and they like said if you treated them fair and nicely and you were just a good person, they would help you out and they would give you tips and they would kind of guide you in what to do. And not having served in the military, I don't know, but I always kind of like make the assumption that it was probably like the person just coming out of like the academy, getting paired up with some like grizzled combat veteran who kind of shows them the ropes. And that's kind of what it was, but it was like a huge learning experience for me. And those people kind of shaped what was probably already a good foundation on dealing with people from my big Greek family, to here's how to lead people and here's how to motivate people and here's how to treat people in a work setting. And that was probably, had I not had that, I think I would have been set back many, many years. It was a good experience.
So did you have the presence of mind at the time to appreciate that lesson and that learning time for what it was, or can you only see that looking in hindsight?
Now, I think I understood it at the time. I think it was, very clear, and maybe part of it was, this very, strong family upbringing where, I never talked back to my dad. I never, it was like unthinkable. Your parents said something, you listened and you listened attentively. And so here were people who were, my parents' age giving me advice. I was listening, and it was good. And these people, looked out for you. And then I think the real eye opener for me at the time was because I think I grew up with like a really fantastic family situation with, tremendous parents, that there were people that were my parents' age that were, complete idiots. And, so just being an adult didn't make you, smart or wise or awesome. And so you're dealing with people with some really petty problems and some really small time issues. And you're like, you know, you're like nearly 60, you should you should probably be over this by now. And so it was just a real big eye opener for me, and a lot of people took me under their wing and helped groom me. And some of the leadership there that was in middle management at the time.
Right.
And so it was just, I kind of knew what I was getting and I really appreciated it. And to this day, it's why I'm talking about it on your show. It's it had a big impact on me.
Well, I think that that's kind of cool because if you look at this not only in contemporary American society, but if you look at global society, us understanding generational gaps, and then here you are, right out of the chute, you get put in this generational gap, but you adapted to that so quickly. What do you think you can attribute that to for your ability to receive that feedback and take it for what it was and apply it rather than, oh, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, this is a different time, anything like that? What can you attribute that success to?
I hate to be, boring on this one, but it's like, you grow up in a big ethnic family. It's like, yeah, you're getting feedback all the time.
Right.
It's like you kind of get good with that. I think the other facet, and I think this is really important, and I always like stress this. I stressed it. My wife and I stress it with our kids. Is sports. I played a ton of sports, and I think sports are a great way to, it's not just about being physically fit or pushing yourself hard and trying to achieve some big goal. If you take a look at just what happens on any given day in a practice, you are getting measured. So you have to get comfortable being measured. You are taking feedback and you are figuring out how you can learn something new just about every day. And if you take a look at those facets, and it doesn't matter if you're doing that with sports or music or something else, but if you get yourself in the mindset from an early age where you can take that feedback and not just like reject it because it's like, oh, don't tell me what to do. It's like, no, here's a better way to do this. Here's a better way to, do your footwork. And it could be small things like, hey, here's how you do a drop step. Okay, that's going to help me. Here's how you want to move your hips and things like that. And it's these small little tweaks where you understand how maybe something that seems so seemingly small with a sporting situation can have such a large impact on your ability to perform on the big stage. And so when you are used to that, it's very much easier for someone who might give you some guidance on the shop floor and just say, hey, the next time you approach Rose, maybe you want to talk this way or be a little softer because this is the way she works. You're going to get a lot more with a little bit of honey, than you will with, taking a stronger stance. And I think if you're used to understanding how small things can have a big impact, you're a little more sensitive and understanding to taking those little things and not just blowing them off and saying, oh, that's stupid. I don't need to pay attention to that. That doesn't seem important right now.
Right. I number one completely agree with that. And then, so much for me wanting to get my kids into sports, I think to your point is rarely about the actual sport itself. Right. I want them to get used to a society or a feedback mechanism process. I want them to know what it's like to be a good teammate when somebody else loses the big game for them. I want them to know what it's like when they lose the big game for everybody else, and everything that works into that. And so this ties into huge sports analogies. And I'm a huge sports analogy person and or teams. And so you've had one of your guests on there who studied like 17, like the captains.
Yeah. Oh,
His
epic
book,
class.
his book, The Captains, and inevitably they talk about the 85 Bears. Always kind of comes
Ah.
the Chicago Bulls of the 90s. So what are some of your favorite sports teams? Maybe not Chicago related that you think are really great metaphors for a solid understanding and application of leadership, and why?
Well, I want to give all credit to like Sam Walker and his book, The Captain Class. I think it's a great book. It's one that I bought for my son who's 20 years old, and I just said, you got to read this book. This is an awesome book because he's a big sports guy. But I'm like, it's always trying to teach someone something in the guise like it might be disguised as a sports book, but then you walk away going, there's a lot of leadership lessons there. Um, of course, I'm a Chicago guy, so I love all uh, the Bears, the Bulls. I mean, how fun was that? And I think even like in recent years, I think I really enjoyed watching the Blackhawks
Yeah.
because there's a team that was like they would be like out of the game. They'd be like 2 goals down with like a minute or two left, and they could like win that game. And that's one of those mentalities where you really have to have a special mindset to have that kind of grit. I mean, to come back and just see like it's not over yet.
Right.
There's still something we can do, and to have the focus to be able to make something happen in very short periods of time. I just like, I'm always impressed by that. But I'm a big fan of sports. I mean, this whole pandemic is like killing us. That we don't have any sports. I was so thankful. Maybe it was a couple Sundays ago when ESPN put on the Ocho again, and all my family did was watch like the Ocho all day. It was like combat juggling or something like that. It's like, yeah, bring it on. I need sports. So I just always think back to, like, I think the Roosevelt quote, like, or the little kind of like stanza, like the man in the arena.
You bet.
Um, I think that's probably the greatest thing about sports, is that whole thing is like, you could be a spectator in the stands and watch and criticize, but you really have no room to criticize until you are the man in the arena.
Right.
And you're down there getting dirty and seeing what it's like. And that's the only time when you really have respect for your opponents, respect for the amount of effort that goes into it. So, any kind of sport, right now we're just, March Madness got canceled. This is devastating in our household. My son goes to Kentucky.
Oh,
It stung.
yeah, yeah. Like, what an absolute kick in the pants. And again, I'm a huge sports guy. But yeah, like even as, and again, and here we go. As we start talking about the man in the arena, I instantly start thinking about the movies and the movie quotes that I personally identify with. I know that you are a movie buff as well, so I'll try not to use as much leading language. And I'm very certain that we're going to time more 5 hours just talking movies, because again, I think everything can be a leadership lesson if you have the presence of mind to look through a leadership lens. And so like when we're talking about man in the arena, and obviously I have one in mind. Is there something that kind of stands out to you for that understanding about how we understand leadership and experiences, and it's not just the academic study, but the actually doing that is important?
Well, doing it is so important because, if you take a look at, I think the best metaphor, it's not a movie quote here, but it's just like the Monday morning quarterbacking of situations. Everyone's always going like, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he threw that interception. I can't believe he didn't see this. Is like, when you do things at like game speed, like an NFL play is, it's like 3-4 seconds, and if you don't get rid of the ball quick, it's all over. And in fact, there was like, okay, here's like just how sports deprived we are. There was that Peyton's Places where they were celebrating the 100 years of the NFL. And there is one episode on quarterbacks, and it was kind of really fascinating. And Steve Young was talking, and Steve Young's talking about, like, I had to get comfortable throwing the ball when I couldn't see the receiver, because he was just like, I don't know. I thought he was taller than he was, but I guess he wasn't as tall as I thought. And he goes, there were times when, like, I just couldn't see the receiver, and I wouldn't throw the ball, and I'd miss the open man. I knew where he was supposed to be on the route. So his coach, Bill Walsh, at the time said, you just got to throw to where you think he's going to be. And he goes, my career didn't take off until I started throwing where and I couldn't even see the guy. I mean, think about that. These are these little nuances about, sport at the highest level. And he's kind of like guessing. And so you sit there and you say, who are we to criticize what people are doing? You get people who make like the top levels of the NBA or any other sport. So, there's some guy who's, on his 5th Pabst, and he's saying that guy's a bum. And you go, he's a bum? He made the NBA. He's not a bum. This guy's pretty good. He's having a bad day. I'm guessing, you've had some of those too.
I have a tough time with Colin Cowherd for that very reason. I think he's a very, very intelligent man. I think he puts out great content, and half the times, like, oh, they're better than you. Like you really need to watch how critical you need to be of somebody because you're not in the arena.
Yeah. And it's, that's not to say that, and I think, this is an interesting clarification. There are some great coaches that were crappy players or never even played, because coaching is a different thing than playing. But I do think that you can't be a great coach, even if you didn't play, if you don't have respect for what the players go through. If you don't respect what they do, and this is the same as, let's say, as a business coach, like I am, I'm not an expert in every industry out there. So I have a lot of respect for the people that I work with they know their domain. They know what they've got going on, whether it's a tech company or a manufacturing company or something else. But there are things that I know from my experiences as a coach that I can lend to the process to make things better. What was someone going to teach Michael Jordan about, like, how to be better? But the reality is Phil Jackson had some things that he used to teach Michael Jordan how to be a better teammate, how to organize the team to get the right people there so that the right captains were in place to support him and do the things that a captain needs to do that Michael Jordan, a superstar, can't do. And so I think that was really, there's a time and place for the people who bring different elements to the leadership or the team environment, but it's all about that respect.
You bet. And for me, obviously, respect and perspective, and the ability to have a good conversation about the articulation of differing perspectives. And like, for me, movie quote wise, every time when I hear "Man in the Arena," I think about the Robin Williams soliloquy in Good Will Hunting when he's sitting on the
Oh
bench
yeah.
with Matt Damon. And he's like, you've probably studied Michelangelo and everything about him and blah, 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 blah. But you can't tell me what it's like, what it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel, and stood there and stared at that beautiful wall. And like, I love that image that he does. And so I, that resonates with me personally. So what are some of the movies? What are the quotes and scenes that strike a chord with you?
Yeah, well, this is going to be where I expose my complete lowbrow sense of humor. I could probably, anything Bill Murray or Will Ferrell, I probably can recite with, it's just like insolent ease. I just, for a little aside, I used to entertain myself in meetings as I got, advanced in my career. And like, if there was a boring meeting, I'd be like, I'm going to get through this whole meeting and I'm only going to use movie quotes. I won't say there will be no original thought that comes out of my mouth. I'm just going to get through this meeting and pure movie quotes. And like, sometimes people wouldn't figure it out. Sometimes people are like, oh, that was a bit, what's going on with Jim? And then sometimes there'd be that dude on the other side of the room that would like look at me and go like, nice, well done.
Is that nod
So
and the smirk?
that nod, that smirk that just says, I see the game you're playing. And so, but someone posted something on Facebook. They were like, hey, put your favorite movie quote out there. And, it nearly broke the machine, because I'm just like, I have to pick one. There's no way I could have a movie quote. And to be honest with you, they just kind of pop into my head, where it's just like, oh, this is the right moment for this, this thing, But, who doesn't love, 60% of the time it works every time.
Every time.
I mean, who doesn't love that? Come on, that it comes up often in business meetings.
And it's so funny because so many of these movie quotes and these movies are just the phrase, or like, how about this? What did we used to call a day that repeated itself over and over again, like the whole monotony, before the movie Groundhog Day came out?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we have it, like, everyone just calls it Groundhog Day. Like, it's part of contemporary culture now.
Yeah, it's amazing, and the movies are super powerful, and they're a great way to tell stories. And I know that I've used a lot of movies. I mean, we had Dean DeCivio on the podcast, and he had a whole book he wrote on real lessons in leadership about how to get movies that teach leadership lessons. And it's funny because I had done a bunch of training years earlier where I had movie clips, and notably, I mean, we're talking about leadership, so there were certainly movies that had a military focus. I mean, I think a couple of the ones that are like really good that had like good leadership lessons in them were like When We Were Soldiers. I thought that was good with Mel Gibson. That was a good one that had some good leadership lessons in it. Another one was U-571. I thought that one had some good stuff where they got the captain or the young, person who has to assume leadership because Matthew McConaughey, because the captain is died, and he's got to take over, and you got the grizzled combat veteran, Master Chief, whatever he was. I don't know what he was. The ranks elude me, and kind of saying like, hey, you can't say to the guys you don't know, you always have to know, and that was kind of interesting. Yeah, but I'll tell you the one that surprised me as far as like one of the great like leadership movies. And I know we talked about The Godfather with Dean, But Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction has some great leadership lessons, okay? And especially with Winston Wolfe. If you think about like what Winston Wolfe does, it is a master class in crisis management. If you want to take a look at someone who jumps in and just says, we're going to stay calm, we've got a sense of urgency, we're going to address this situation, here's what we can do, and they're cleaning up the car and they're putting the sheets on the car and it looks terrible, but it's like, this is the best we can do right now. But we're going to stay calm. We're going to be cool like Fonzie. We're going to take care of this whole situation and we're going to get through this. And if you take a look at like staying calm under pressure, whether it's Samuel L. Jackson or Harvey Keitel, there's a lot of really good examples of how people kind of really deal with extraordinary circumstances with some level of grace. And I think that is, there's something to be learned in a very comical way. I mean, I'm not taking myself too seriously there, but it's, I always thought that one was good.
No, and that's funny. That's one thing that has never really occurred to me, but looking back on it, just the way he does that. And again, for me, the way he understands the expectations of everybody and who lives in the house. And hey, I got to give you money for this. I was going to take all your sheets. I know that this is an inconvenience for you. I acknowledge that. Let's kind of move forward.
But even like small things like hey, who gave this to you? Your aunt, I can't remember what it was, aunt whatever. And it's like, yeah, well, oh wow, that must have been nice. I mean, I took the time to slow things down during a crisis because he understood that there were personal emotions attached to certain things. So, hey, let's talk about the coffee. Let's talk about where you got the sheets and the comforter for, who got those for you. I see that's important to you. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's totally not important, because there's a crisis going on. But for him to get what he needs to get accomplished, that moment, he needs to laser focus on that person, their emotional attachment to a thing or a situation. You could be in the middle of a crisis in a business or perhaps in the battlefield. Someone might have some emotional attachment that we just have to deal with momentarily, because if we don't, this is going to take much longer than it needs to. And I think those types of issues are, that sensitivity is like just lost. And I think that's part of like this hidden brilliance in that film.
Oh yeah. Well, absolutely. So I have to go back, and obviously I have plenty of time on my hands right now at home to watch some of these movies. And it's funny because my aunt is in the credits for Pulp Fiction as one of the
Really?
designers. You'll see Marilyn Pachesa listed there. So huge shout out to my wonderful auntie there. But you had also mentioned we were soldiers. And so having never served, but I know that you've had General McChrystal on your podcast. You've had General Petraeus on your podcast. So I'm very interested. What are the things in that movie that resonate with you?
I just thought, I think some of the kind of speeches that he kind of gave to the guys, because they were trying something new, and he was, he didn't candy coat it. He was like, this is going to be dangerous. This is going to be tough. We're going to do this. He did the kind of Simon Sinek, leaders eat last. He was the last guy to get on the helicopter and stuff like that. And so, I mean, that's the kind of the cliche leadership stuff. But I mean, even though it's cliche, it's kind of important. And I think that's, the kind of thing where even in a time of crisis like this, if we might be asking people to take pay cuts, I mean, if you're a leader, you should be taking the biggest pay cut. And, some companies have done that. I mean, there's some firms that have just been hammered hard. And I think both the CEOs of like Marriott and Hyatt, they did some really good stuff during this time, because they, of course, had to lay off a ton of people or furlough people just because the devastating effects the pandemic has had on the hotel business. But I think the Marriott guy, if I remember correctly, because I watched his little video, he's like, I'm not taking a salary the rest of the year. All these other people are following suit. And so that's the same kind of mentality that happens in the business world that might happen in a military unit. So I think there's a lot of good examples there, and when we were soldiers, and and it's just a good movie. I like it.
It's a phenomenal movie for me. And I retired. I ended my career at Fort Hood, Texas, where 1st Cavalry Division is currently stationed. So there's an obstacle course there dedicated to Command Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, played by Sam Elliott. So I pass that every day. And so he had such a great character. And it's funny because obviously, serving 25 years I completely agree. I like the way that Mel Gibson communicates with everybody. And then there was one night there in the heart of battle where Mel Gibson's character, then Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, asked his Sergeant Major Basil Plumley. He's like, I wonder if this is how Custer felt, and he turns around and he says, he's like, sir, Custer was a expletive needed, and, but I love that as a leadership sense for having a trusted confidant to give it to him straight, to pull him back right where he needed. And then a lot of times I don't think necessarily we have good conversations about our teammates being there to give that brutal feedback and just give you that little bit of a mental slap in the face to get you back on path. So that's one of the things that I love about that movie.
Yeah, and for not being a military guy, over the last few years, I've been absolutely heartwarmed, and because I've been embraced by a lot of folks in the military community, and really, in a way I never thought I would be, because I hadn't served. But it's really interesting because you learn about, let's say, the value of, let's say, the command sergeant major or the master chief in the Navy, things like that, and that's like such a huge important role. And I remember being invited into, let's say, this graduation ceremony at Great Lakes Naval Base up here a few years back, and I was invited by a bunch of guys who were doing the preliminary SEAL training, so they get the guys ready to go to Bud School up there. So I made some friends over there, and they had me come in and watch the training one morning. And one of the guys was Master Chief Lou, and tons of medals, super badass, finishing out his service by training guys at Great Lakes. And so we were watching the training in the morning. So saw the guys by the pool, saw the guys out on the track. And then we were sticking around to go to the graduation for all the new recruits that were going through whatever their boot camp and getting out. And so, I was dressed up in a suit because I was going to this thing, which was formal. And the head of the Navy was going to be there that day. And so he was there, and he was there walking in, just an entourage and someone holding like a nuclear football, I guess is what it must have been, And so like they're all running around, and like everyone's saluting everyone, and everyone's like dressed to the nines in their whites and stuff like that. The Navy whites are like, it's like your eyes almost hurt for a couple of days afterwards. And here's this Master Chief, like in shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt, and he just shows up like that, and like everyone's just like, all respect, and no one, he got a wide berth, maybe a wider berth than that of the Navy, and it was just one of these things where it's like there's a ton of respect there. And for the folks that I've gotten to know in the Army with the command sergeant majors and stuff like that, just a ton of respect. That's something the business world doesn't necessarily have as much of. And that's, I think, that confidant, that person who's got that, bare knuckles kind of experience that just says, here's how it really is. And I think that is, if we could take one thing from the military and bring that into the corporate world, I think it's that. It's that, grizzled combat veteran, that person who knows what's really going on, and listening to them and respecting them to that highest degree. And I think in some small way, the role of coaches is starting to help with that, but it's still not exactly the same. I don't think, it's quite where it needs to be.
Wow, that's a phenomenal concept, and I have often wondered, as I've just recently entered the civilian workforce, exactly is there a counterpart to a senior enlisted advisor, at those different echelons, who's there to be the boots on ground type of person to give the frontline perspective. So that's very interesting. That's maybe something to exploit. And so we will we'll take a break here with this conversation, and we'll lead this into the second half. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with the co-host of the Leadership Podcast, Jim Vaselopulos. Be right back. Okay, welcome back from break. This is Chachi once again, and then kind of continuing some of the subjects from the first part. Again, I could talk movies with Jim all day, so this is absolutely hysterical, just how kind of similar this plays out. But again, it's unique that two different men who have like zero background together can find some commonality through movies and how we see things through a leadership lens. And again, I think that lends to the complexity of the human spirit and then also, the ability for us to have this shared and common vernacular that gives you instant credibility, instant recognition. You're able to kind of evoke an emotion and an understanding with some of that stuff. But kind of going back through, just the whole leadership concept is now, as everyone is adjusting to their new norm because of COVID-19. So whether that's working remotely, working from home, homeschooling, everything that kind of goes into this. This is a whole lot of change for people to deal with. As I said on my podcast before, I hate change management. I'd much prefer evolutionary leadership. So what are your thoughts for what people need to do to evolve or change? Perhaps you and I can disagree with this, but what are some of the things that they probably need to do, perhaps even mindset wise, to find success through this tough time?
Yeah, I like your distinction with evolve versus change, and here's why I like it. And you could get into an argument, you're splitting hairs or something like that, but if you say like change, okay, implicit in that, like psychologically, there's something that says like what you were before is bad. You need to change to something that's good. Okay. Just like you were on the wrong side of this issue and now you're on the right side of this issue. I mean, it's really a binary kind of mentality. When you think of it as like evolution, it's more like, hey, this is a progression, Hey, here's what I used to think, but then I learned some more information. Now I've changed my mind because I have more information. You say I used to be this way, but before the pandemic, but hey, some things happened. Now I'm looking at things a little bit differently. I've changed my priorities. But it's an evolution in how I view the world and the information that I've gathered to change my perspective. Because I think, we get so caught up now as a society right now on these like ideological purity tests and things like that. It was like, you can't be a good person because one time in 1962, you said this. And it's like, so then what we're saying as a society is we value people who don't evolve, who don't learn. If you want to just hammer down like a disrespect for education, or talk about these ideological purity tests we put people through. People learn, they grow, they change. But really, I think when you say change, it's this. It really cements that binary notion that you were wrong and now you're right, or you were bad and now you're good. Instead of like, hey, I gathered more information, my perspectives altered, they changed, they evolved because I learned something. And if you take a look at like what's going on in the pandemic, it's not to say that what we were doing before was bad or wrong, but now we might look at things a little bit differently because we have more information. And I think all the hyperbole and conjecture we've got right now with regard to what's causing this and who screwed up or who did the wrong things, in 6 months we're going to be Monday morning quarterbacking that thing and having different perspectives, and the real truth will come out in 60 years when people do a more blind and less emotional analysis and say, hey, here's what really went well and here's what didn't go well. And I think one of the things that for you to really understand, and here's why I'll say, like, I think there is a distinction between evolution and change. uh, Change is sudden, evolution is slow. Okay. And I think on the right time horizon, evolution happens very, very slowly, but it's small little things that allow us to kind of grow and develop into a different form, a different capability, a different normal. Change is how we describe the short-term suddenness of things. And I think anytime, let's say, if I were to be implementing something in a big company, I think if you just focus on the short term, you're doing yourself a disservice. You need to look at the long term and how deep seated some people are in their behaviors, and how this is going to affect people long after this program is completed and done. And I think that's where kind of an evolutionary mindset is probably better than just a pure change mindset that's just saying, let's focus on this narrow sliver in time right here and just get through that. And then like, hey, let's move on to the next thing. So I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think the way you frame things. And I think if we want to even look at our current circumstance, you know, what does this do? Well, how are we evolving as a society? How is the nature of work evolving? How are all these things changing? Big macro things. I mean, this is my, pandemic beard. This is change. This is like, temporary.
I'm
It's a
growing
moment.
mine right now.
Yeah. So, I've gotten, I'm like 3-4 weeks into a pandemic beard. We'll see. Hopefully I don't look like Moses when this whole thing is over. I don't want that 10 Commandments beard. That would be bad. If I still grown a beard by that time, but, that's change. But, evolution is like, hey, how's this changing our work relationships? How, I hope somehow there's a silver lining and how people are reconnecting with their families, how people are spending more time maybe being present with one another, after, you've binge watched everything on Netflix, then I got to actually play a board game with my family. So hopefully there's some silver linings that come out of all this sudden change that really contribute to a better evolution of who we are.
And I obviously agree completely. And again, I really like you kind of teasing out the whole timeline aspect of it. Don't sacrifice a long-term gain for a short-term fear, and or success. And then specifically, there's a lot of people that I know who haven't necessarily evolved and or changed. And people always default to, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which I think is complete bullshit, right? So like,
Yeah.
this is not a dog learning new tricks, because the dog doesn't care about tricks, but the dog cares about its own survival and its own evolution to adjust to the environment around. But again, I don't think a lot of people are kind of picking up that mindset. But as we go to evolution, and if you're to look back as far as either your evolution as a leader or how you're helping people evolve for themselves, whether personally, professionally, individually, or for their team, what are some of the things that you go to, some of the different resources, books, movies, podcasts, TED Talks that you have found especially enlightening, and kind of and what inspires you to help put out great content and make sure that you stay at the top of your game for this?
Well, I think, one thing I love is the fact that we've got the podcast, the leadership podcast, because it forces me to talk to just a ton of people. It basically, what do they say? Steel sharpens steel. So, you get a chance to talk to a bunch of different people, get different perspectives and learn. And so the fact that, we've done this for like 4 years, haven't missed a week. It doesn't mean we interview someone every week. We like have some weeks where we interview 4 or 5 people and queue them up. But, that forces you to kind of learn all the time and read way more books than I've ever read in my life. And so, I think that is just super important. I think, now more than ever, because we are getting some sensitivity to the human interactions we're not having as frequently, how they keep all of us a little bit sharp, just the small little conversations we have in the workplace when we're seeing people, when we're having dinner, when we're walking through the neighborhood, and we kind of crave that as humans. And so if you are missing that right now, supplement it. And a great way to supplement that is, having video calls like this with people, but listening to podcasts, reading books. I know some of the people who've had like a profound impact. I'm just kind of like looking at a list here. Like, I'm like helping me evolve. Like Sebastian Younger, who wrote the book Tribe, that guy really helped me evolve a lot of my thinking, because I went into it not thinking a certain way, came out of just one conversation in the podcast, one interview, and was basically like, I have a different perspective on how I view a lot of things. I thought that was really fantastic. We've had a ton of conversations with guys like Dan Pink, really changed, really influenced a lot of my thinking. One of my personal kind of like people who I just like respect and adore is Dr. Robert Cialdini. He's written a number of books like on influence and persuasion. He's got his latest one is called Persuasion. Like, just amazing stuff on how we think as humans, which I think is really fascinating. So in that regard, I really have enjoyed that. Guys recently, Safi Bakal wrote Loon Shots. Sam Walker wrote The Captain Class. Great book. Really love that book. Horst Schulze, the guy who co-founded Ritz-Carlton Hotels. What a gentleman. What a really classy person. And his book was just spectacular. Just really, really good. I never would have read that book if it weren't for the podcast. And so I think right now is a great time to read. Probably some of the seminal books that have shaped my mindset on how I think about a lot of things. I know there's one I've been probably recommended more than any other book in my entire um, business career. Let's put it that way. The Experience Economy by Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore. Great book on how to frame things. I've been talking about loon shots a lot lately. Maybe the book that I think has influenced my thinking, especially with regard to the selling and the coaching that I do, is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Great book. And like recently there was a good one. I mean, I like, Extreme Ownership by Jocko and Team of Teams by General McChrystal. I mean, I've read those. They're great books. I really like them both. There's one, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. That one was really good. And that one combines like a lot of Stoic philosophy by Marcus Aurelius, because he's the only guy who wrote down a lot about Stoic philosophy, but it really started with like Aristotle and a lot of the Greek philosophers. And so but he wrote down so much with his like treatise, like the Meditations. And the Meditations, if you try and read them, are like, they're hard to read because it's like reading Latin. It's not fun. But this guy takes it, turns it into a story, kind of walks through the philosophy in a story mode, and then adds in some elements of neurolinguistic processing, like to the modern science, to say, here's what's really how it meshes with very nicely with what we're doing today. I thought that was a really good book. So that one is a good one. And then I think Simon Sinek's latest book, The Infinite Game, I think that's by far like his best book. The others were, I'm not saying they're bad books. They were great books and they're bestsellers. Like Start with Why, pretty simple, but you read it and you're like, well, that's pretty simple. Leaders Eat Last. You read it and you go like, okay, that's what when we were soldiers. That is basically it's a book written about like some of the things from that movie. But The Infinite Game is like that's like it's next level stuff for him, and he's already at the next level. So I was really impressed by that one.
Wow, awesome. So there's so I've read about half of those books, and what's very interesting is when you get around people who are I wouldn't you probably wouldn't either say that you're just an expert in leadership, but just there's so much value just being a true student of leadership.
Yeah.
And going around and reading all those books, and again sharing different reading lists. 50% is going to be repeated again and again and again, but the other 50% is going to be absolutely huge. And I'm a big believer of the Mark Twain quote, where he says like the man who does not read good books has no advantage over the man who can't.
Yeah.
And so there's another philosophy that I absolutely subscribe to, which is part of the big reason that I got into the podcasting business, was that with the advent of the internet is we are drowning in information and yet thirsting for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to be some of that person who kind of saves people from drowning, gives them a life preserver, and then gives them kind of sippable gulps of content and knowledge for them to kind of go from. So that's kind of been a little bit of my focus. But out of the guests that you've had, and again, may not necessarily be book related, but what have been some of your fantastic guests that really stand out? And again, if we don't want to, because by naming some, you're kind of disregarding others, which I'm not trying to do. But what are some of the prevalent concepts or the things that you've heard that have really just kind of blown your ears back?
Well, there are a couple that I thought like, and what I would say is like maybe I'm going to pick three, okay? And I wouldn't say they're the most well-known people. I wouldn't even say, but they like came out with like stuff that was like that was kind of interesting. Like I'd never heard that. So there's a guy by the name of Eric Kish, and he's like a turnaround expert. And so he's one of these guys when like a really big company you probably hear on the news is like in crisis and they need to turn them around. He kind of gets the call, he goes in and he helps turn them around. And one of the things he says that's part of his playbook, this like shocked me, this floored me. He goes in, and one of the first things he does is finds that person who is kind of the sacred cow, who they be like, you absolutely can't fire this person. Like this, of all the people you could fire, like this would be the one person you can't fire, and he fires them. And and he's And I'm like, well, why would you take your Michael Jordan and like kind of fire them? And he's like, finds that person who's just like, listen, it might not be Michael Jordan, but it's like, listen, you're great, you get results, you're awesome. Maybe you're not the best team player, something like that. And he will get rid of them. And he goes, yeah, I need to send a message, because if we're going to turn this ship, around quickly, people need to understand that there's there's going to be some pain here, and the only way for them to understand that is to take someone who is untouchable and lead them out of the organization. Then he gets compliance pretty quickly, and it's not that he doesn't, he wants people to be involved in the change that's happening, and he doesn't want them to be like, oh, well, I'm going to comply, otherwise I'm going to get shot in the head like the Godfather. But the reality is he needs to send a message quickly, because the turnaround needs some velocity. It needs some attention and focus, and that like kind of surprised me. And he explained it really well, so that would be like one I'd really think. There's another guy, I think it was Chris Warner. Chris talked about, like, he's got this 3-hour rule. If 3 or more people spend 3 or more hours talking about like another person in the organization, they fire them. And it's like, listen, if we're spending that much time talking about dealing with you, you shouldn't be on the team. And I will say that early in my career, I was slow to fire people. As I got more experience in my career, I made those decisions much quicker. And it's not because I'm a heartless, Mr. Burns, trying to like, count my money or something like that. It was like, listen, it was, and I attribute this to my long standing as a Cubs fan. How many Cubs players did we have in the team that sucked? And then we trade them to some other team, and then they like make the all-star team the next year. It's not about them being a bad person or judging them. It's more about, you're just in the wrong place right now. And sometimes those people need to get in the right place. And so in that regard, he had kind of boiled it down to kind of a little heuristic. There's like, 3 more people are complaining about you, and we spent 3 more hours talking about you, time to go. I thought that was really interesting. And then let's see, another one I thought I really enjoyed. And I thought it was good was the head lacrosse coach at Marquette University, Joe Amplo. I really like Joe, and lacrosse is near and dear to my heart because it was a sport I picked up in college, played in college at the club level, played men's leagues until I couldn't. And and my son played, and he plays for University of Kentucky now, and on their club team. And so I love lacrosse, but he is a great coach, and he took a program that really didn't exist and made it to the highest levels of the national championships a few years back. And he said something. He establishes standards, and he says, we have to have standards, and I coach to the standards. I established the standard, and that was a lesson that I learned as a business leader. It was a lesson I learned when I was coaching youth sports. And I thought he explained everything really, really well. And what I found was it was very similar to kind of the things General McChrystal talked about when we interviewed him a couple times about the standards, especially with regard to the special forces, special operations community. Is, we have these standards that we operate to. It's not trying to measure people against each other. It's, we are all measuring ourselves against a standard. And I think that is when you do things that allow you to become an elite organization. And whether it's in business or in the military or a sporting team, et cetera. And it's just a common theme. I thought Joe did a great job of explaining it in a very endearing way. So those were kind of 3 that like wouldn't be on the radar for most people, but kind of stuck with me.
So I'm completely blown away by this, by all 3 of them. As far as Eric Kish, as far as how quickly you could go from the sacred cow to the sacrificial lamb. Like I think that's an amazing twist, and seeing how that goes. I personally lived that whole 3 hours complaining about somebody.
We all have.
like complaining, but like the person never left. And I'm absolutely with you. Like there are all kinds of reasons to keep somebody on board. Benefit of the doubt. Just maybe give them every opportunity to succeed. But sometimes, hey, this just isn't the environment for you. Not every plant can grow in every environment out there. So
Mhm.
maybe the food and watering I'm doing with everybody else just isn't your cup of tea. And obviously establishing standards is absolutely near and dear to my heart as far as the understanding and articulation of expectations. Not an assumption, not an anticipation, but a solid expectation based off of
Mhm.
available information and or past experience. So that's absolutely huge. But going to past experience, from you getting out of college to your first job at the factory, to now being an entrepreneur, a consultant, a podcast host. Are there any, not trying to get you to kind of expose your soul here, but are there any seminal moments of successes and failures that have been particularly earth-shattering, or at least like mind-shaping and or altering some way, that has helped you kind of work through concepts that have really, you've used that as perhaps fuel to push you towards even greater success?
Um, there, there's actually one that comes to mind, and this is probably pretty early in my corporate career. And we had a situation where I was doing really well. I was like on the fast track, and I think I'm gonna change the blinds here because the sun's out now, and it's like I think I'm like I was like a shadow there for a while. Um, so the my corporate career was going well. I was getting increasing levels of importance, and I was running an automated manufacturing cell that was like chunking out like tons of products off the end of the line. It was super like prestigious, and it was like, being entrusted with that was pretty awesome. And it was cool because I was a geeky engineer, and we had like robot arms moving all over the place. And it was like, this is so cool. I can't believe I'm doing this. And and the cool thing about it is this manufacturing line was like a huge profit center. Like every time one of these parts came off the end of the line, it was like, they were coming off the end of the line, and like it was like $3 a profit, $3 a profit, $3 a profit. And like the highest levels of the company would like walk by every once in a while just to make sure everything was going okay. They'd be like, how's everything going today? I'd be like, going fine, sir. And they'd be like, good, because then, the quarter's looking good. And we had a problem with some parts that were supplied to us, and they were breaking. And we didn't know they were breaking until like after they left our area, because they got brittled because of some, brittle because of some plating process. And it was, very technical and stuff that, I still to this day like hardly understand. But and it was like, it created a dangerous situation for the people who would be using this product in the field, potentially life threatening. If a series of events happened, it could potentially take someone's life in a high voltage situation. And I was in this big ass meeting to talk about whether we recall the product or not. It was like a million people in this meeting. It was just a ton of people, and I'm like the lowliest, lamest, low level guy there. But of course, like, my fingerprints are all over this thing, and everyone's just pointing fingers at me. And we're having a discussion, and they're a bunch of like really smart, good people, and I knew these people, and we drank beers together and stuff like that. And so no one there was like a bad person, but we were going through the mechanics of like, what does a recall cost? How much would it take to rework the product? How much is this going to slow down production? What are we going to need to do to retrofit all these parts? And running through the numbers of what this would cost. And it was a standard process. I mean, I wasn't saying it was like this, these things happen in manufacturing. And it got to the point where, in my mind, I was like, we're got to make a decision whether to recall these or not. And potentially, if we don't, someone could die. And like, and I don't even want to get into a situation of like how many people would have to die before we need to recall. And so no one wanted to make the call. And of course everyone wanted to like blame me and blame whoever. And it was fine. I was already dead as far as I was concerned. I'd already lost my job, so I got nothing to live for. It's like I probably just screwed up and I'll never recover from this. And then there was just kind of like this long pause or moment of silence while people were like, well, what do you think we should do? And I just raised my hand, and probably shouldn't have raised my hand. It was a business meeting, but I'm like, I was like totally junior, didn't know what I was doing. I was totally, not in my element. And I just said, I don't see how we have any decision but to recall it. I mean, and I know I've got to rework this, and I take responsibility for it. So I just like fell on my sword because I'm like, I didn't know anything better to do. And it seemed like the right thing to do. I said, we have to recall it, I don't want to go home and think about like some dude who trusted us to, have this thing work. And then, someone has to explain to his wife and kids why, he didn't come home that day. And, and then everyone was just like, yeah, you're right. We got to recall these things. And it was kind of like a really important moment because I went from a guy who thought he lost his job, thought I'd lost like this rocket ship career that was, in front of me that just like stunted. I thought this was going to be the end of it all. But, at the end of the day, it was like I needed to do the right thing because I needed to be able to go home and look, my parents in the eye and say, oh, if it made the news, if 60 Minutes put a microphone in front of me, I didn't want to have to, answer and just say, well, we did a calculation on, what a life is worth. And it's like, don't want to be there. And so at the end of the day, the company made the right decision. And I don't know if I was rewarded for, let's say, my corporate bravery, but I wasn't reprimanded. And I certainly gained a lot of respect with a lot of people. And that was like the moment that in my career where I was like, it's okay to do the right thing. It's okay. That was maybe a moment of corporate courage. And, I look back on that and just say, I think that shaped me.
Wow. That, that's, obviously I've got some combat experiences. So there's some bravery there, but even in my civilian job now, I understand how difficult that is to kind of speak up sometimes for fear, like, cause I'm the new guy in the organization and you don't know if you're calling that ugly baby ugly and there's an angry parent sitting right behind you that you're about to get reprimanded for. So I think that's absolutely phenomenal. Great answer to end the podcast on. I really appreciate you spending time with us. And before we go, do you have any closing words for our viewers and listeners out
Yeah, I think we take a look at, let's say, leadership. It requires a study of history. It requires, leadership isn't just something you pick up like taking a course. It's a process of like really evolving. And the best way to evolve is to talk to other people, is to listen to podcasts like yours, to read books. And I really don't think there's enough of that going on. I mean, we've got to read things that are longer than a tweet, maybe a little longer than a blog post. We need to really get into this stuff. So I'd say really invest in becoming a better leader, and it will pay off in spades for you. And the best way to do that is to listen to podcasts, to read books, and really have deep conversations with people like this. And I thank you from the heart for inviting me to be on the podcast. I hope it's useful for you and your audience. And I encourage people to reach out and contact me if you got any questions.
there? So with that, how would people find you and how can they get a hold of you?
You can go to my website, go to raftiadvisors.com. That's RAFTI advisors.com. And if you want to go to our podcast, you can go to theleadershippodcast.com and find a ton of episodes where, I'm just as big an idiot on that show as I am on this one.
Nice. Well, Jim, thank you so much for, I get that the world doesn't stop just because everyone's in quarantine. I know that you have businesses and podcasts to run. So I definitely appreciate you not only finding the time to be on the podcast, but making the time to be on my podcast. So that's extremely humbling. Thank you so much. For everybody out there, to tune into the Leadership Podcast. Jim has phenomenal thoughts, and his co-host Jan, just good guests, good back and forth. They have some of their own like side episodes where they discuss some of the topics that they've had there. Just the ability to digest some of that learning, I think, as Jim was just explaining, is of the utmost importance. So to Jim Vaselopulos, thank you very much for being on here. We appreciate it. And we'll catch you here next time on the Cape Lead Revolution. This is Chachi reminding you to always educate, anticipate, and dominate. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. See you.
Thank you, Chachi.